if you really want to understand why the strategic landscape, the whole security picture in Europe shifted seemingly overnight, well, you need to look at one specific weapon system.
Yeah. The Russian 9M729 cruise missile.
Right. NATO calls it the SSC-8 screwdriver.
Yep.
And it's not just a piece of hardware, is it? It's really the physical symbol of a broken treaty.
That's exactly it. That's the core issue here. The 9M729, it's the direct reason, the catalyst for the collapse of that foundational treaty, the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, the INF.
Yeah.
And this missiles journey, it went from secret development way back in the mid-2000s right up to its confirmed, verified use in combat in Ukraine just, a few months ago.
Yeah.
That whole arc signals the decisive end of the post-Cold War arms control framework. It's gone.
So our mission today in this deep dive is really to trace that whole life cycle.
Yeah.
From secret labs to the battlefield. But before we get into the missile itself, maybe we should just take a step back. To really get the impact of the INF treaty collapsing, we need to appreciate what it actually did, right? What kind of stability did that 1987 agreement give us?
It was absolutely foundational. People called it the keystone of European security, and honestly, that's not an exaggeration.
Okay.
The INF Treaty was historic because for the very first time, the U.S. and the Soviet Union agreed to get rid of an entire category of weapons. Think about that.
And entire class.
Yeah, all land-based missiles, nuclear and conventional, with ranges between 500 and 500 kilometers. These were the really dangerous ones, short warning times, Put everyone on a hair trigger.
So getting rid of them.
It dramatically increased stability, reduced the risk of a really rapid, maybe unintended escalation in Europe. It was a huge deal.
Okay, so that sets the stage. Now let's unpack the weapon that, shattered that stability. You mentioned that 9M729 started in secret. How far back are we talking?
Yeah.
And what's its sort of technical family tree?
Development started very quietly, back in the mid-2000s, so long before the 2014 Ukraine crisis really kicked off.
Right.
And technically, it's basically a ground-launched version of a missile. The Russian Navy already had the 3M54 caliber, the sea-launched cruise missile.
Ah, okay, so they leveraged existing tech.
Exactly, which was smart, frankly. Reduced costs, helped with the deception. Because, you see, it gave the system this kind of built-in history, a pedigree. But the caliber is legal because it was sea-launched. This was putting it on land.
And that lineage, that leads us straight to the biggest point of contention, doesn't it? The range. Russia always claimed it was compliant.
Officially, Russia insisted its range was just under 500 kilometers, carefully calibrated to stay just inside the treaty limits.
At Western intelligence.
Yeah.
They weren't buying it.
No, not at all. Consistently, they assessed its actual maximum range, its real capability, was somewhere between 2,000 and 2,500 kilometers.
That's a massive difference.
So it's a strategic difference. A 499-kilometer range missile is tactical. A 2,000-kilometer one, that changes the entire theater. It holds major European cities at risk.
Okay, so beyond the range itself, what are the specific features that make this missile such a problem for NATO defense planners?
Well, there are three things that really stand out. First, and this is crucial, it's dual-use capability, meaning it can carry either a standard conventional warhead, about 450, 500 kilograms, or it can carry a low-yield nuclear warhead.
Wow. Okay, so every time one is detected?
NATO commanders have to assume the worst-case scenario. They have to treat it potentially as a nuclear launch until proven otherwise.
So that dual-use thing, it forces this instant potentially catastrophic ambiguity onto the battlefield.
Right.
You take a conventional strike capability and you layer this nuclear risk right on top.
Exactly, and that's the strategic difficulty. Second, the missile itself, it's subsonic, flies around Mach 0.8, maybe a bit less.
Not super fast then.
No, but here's the thing. It uses a very effective low-altitude flight profile. It hugs the terrain, flying maybe 50 to 150 meters off the ground.
Ah. So it stays under the radar.
It makes it incredibly difficult for even sophisticated air defense radars to pick it up early. It drastically shortens the warning time defenders get.
And the third feature you mentioned, mobility, making it hard to find before launch.
Right. It's a road mobile system, a ground-launched cruise missile, or GLCM. It can be dispersed across huge areas of Russia, constantly moving, hiding. But the real sort of masterstroke of deception, if you want to call it that, is the launcher itself, the truck it's carried on.
Okay, tell us about this launcher ambiguity.
Yeah.
How did Russia manage to maintain plausible deniability for so many years on this?
Well, the mobile launcher, it's part of what they call the Iskender-K system, and it was deliberately designed to look almost identical to the launcher for a different missile system.
Which one?
The Iskander-M, which is a ballistic missile system, and importantly, it was treaty compliant. Its range was under the 500-kilometer limit.
So wait, you have two different types of missiles, one legal ballistic, one illegal cruise, potentially using the exact same truck.
That's precisely it. Same chassis, same kind of look.
So it's like having the same car model, but one secretly has a jet engine swapped in. Inspectors looking at the truck, they wouldn't immediately know which missile was actually inside.
Exactly. That intentional visual similarity, that ambiguity, it severely complicated any international verification efforts for years. It gave them cover.
In that ambiguity, that leads us right into the next phase, doesn't it? This whole decade of, well, strategic deception that ultimately killed the INF Treaty. The diplomatic clashes really started heating up around 2014.
Yeah, July 2014. That's when the U.S. first formally, publicly accused Russia of violating the treaty.
And once that accusation was out there, we saw this really elaborate, almost manipulative testing strategy come to light. What did the sources tell us about how they tried to hide it, this two-phase testing thing?
They used a very calculated method. It seems specifically designed to provide plausible deniability. Some analysts even called it strategic gaslighting.
How did it work?
They basically split the tests. So, phase one. They test the 9M729 missile itself, flying it well over the 500-kilometer limit. But crucially, they'd launch it from a fixed test stand, not the mobile launcher.
Right.
And they'd argue, oh, this is just a test for a future sea-based or air-launched version, which would be legal.
Ah, okay. So that's test one. What was test two?
Test two. They'd take the same 9M739 missile, but this time launch it from the actual mobile ground launcher, the illegal configuration, but they deliberately restrict the flight distance to under 500 kilometers.
I see. So they successfully proved the missile could fly the illegal long range, but never from the illegal mobile launcher.
Yeah.
And they proved the illegal mobile launcher worked, but only when firing the missile a legal short distance.
Precisely. They forced the intelligence community to connect the dots while giving the diplomatic community just enough wiggle room to deny.
Clever in a really cynical way.
Yeah, it was. By combining those two separate testing regimes, they developed, perfected, and fielded an operational intermediate-range cruise missile launched from a prohibited mobile platform. A clear, persistent violation of the treaty's core ban.
And eventually the evidence just became undeniable.
By early 2017, the U.S. confirmed Russia hadn't just tested it. They had operationally deployed at least 2 battalions equipped with the 9M729.
And that deployment, that was really the point of no return for the treaty.
It really was. After years of diplomatic wrangling demanding Russia destroy the missiles and launchers and return to compliance, it didn't happen. So the U.S. formally announced its withdrawal and left the INF Treaty on August 2nd, 2019.
And NATO was behind the U.S. on this.
Completely unified. NATO allies stated very clearly that the responsibility for the treaty's collapse rested entirely on Russia and its persistent, uncorrected violation. This one missile system effectively ended that 30-year arms control architecture in Europe.
Okay, let's fast forward now. From that diplomatic breakdown to the stark reality of combat in Ukraine. We know Russia initially had this sort of self-imposed moratorium, right? They said they wouldn't deploy these systems in Europe unless the U.S. did first. But that didn't last.
No, that restraint, such as it was, ended. Russia officially abandoned that moratorium in early August 2025. That basically paved the way for the 9M729 to make its combat debut.
And it didn't take long.
Not long at all. By late October 2025, the Ukrainian foreign minister was publicly confirming that the 9M729 was actively being used against Ukraine.
And we're not just talking about like a single test shot in combat.
No, definitely not. The minister reported at that time that Russia had launched the 9M729 at least 23 times since August 21st, 2025.
Wow.
That averages out to roughly 1 launch every 3 days. It signals they're integrating this previously forbidden weapon system right into their regular conventional strike planning. It's being normalized.
But the absolute irrefutable proof, the sort of physical smoking gun, that came from one specific attack, didn't it?
Yes, that was a really critical event. October 5th, 2025, a strike on a village called Lapaivka in the Lviv region. That's deep in western Ukraine, remember?
Very far west, yeah, near Poland.
Exactly. And Ukrainian officials on the ground, they recovered missile debris fragments. And these fragments were clearly marked with the designation 9M729.
Okay, let's just pause on that. They flew a missile that they swore for a decade could only fly maybe 499 kilometers. They flew it over 1,200 kilometers to hit a target deep in western Ukraine.
That's the confirmation.
That's not just proving intel right. That's like a physical repudiation of their entire diplomatic stance for years.
It is. Military sources confirmed the flight path was over 1,200 kilometers. That single piece of wreckage, that evidence, it irrevocably validated years of Western intelligence assessments. It confirmed the INF Treaty violation beyond any shadow of a doubt. The battlefield provided the ultimate verification.
So why use it now? Why use this highly political, treaty-breaking, once-forbidden system in the current conflict?
Yeah.
What's the strategic messaging there?
Well, tactically, you could argue it adds redundancy. It supplements their dwindling stocks, potentially, of other long-range cruise missiles like the sea-launched Caliburs or the air-launched KH-101s. Gives them more options.
Okay, a practical reason.
But strategically, it's a massive power play. Ukrainian officials, they explicitly called its use a display of contempt for U.S. diplomatic efforts aimed at ending the war.
The timing was significant too, wasn't it?
Very. They highlighted that the launches started less than a week after a high-level U.S.-Russia presidential summit had taken place.
So it's like a deliberate hard power counter-signal right after diplomatic talks.
Yeah.
We hear you talking, but watch what we're doing.
That seems to be the message, yes. A deliberate flexing of military muscle that violates past agreements, almost daring the West to react.
Which brings us, inevitably, to the global fallout. How does the confirmed use of the 9M729 change the game, both inside Ukraine and for NATO more broadly?
Inside Ukraine, the impact is significant. The 9M729's mobility, the fact it can launch from deep inside Russia, potentially far from the front lines, it forces Ukraine to stretch its air defenses really thin.
Because the threat axis could be anywhere.
Exactly. Those valuable, limited advanced systems like Patriot, NASAMS, they now have to cover much larger areas, protecting cities and infrastructure deep in the rear, not just focusing on the front. The whole country becomes a potential target zone from this mobile threat.
And for Europe as a whole. This feels like winding the clock back, doesn't it? Reintroducing the very threat the INF Treaty was designed to eliminate.
It absolutely is. That confirmed 2,000-plus kilometer range puts almost all major NATO European capitals, key military bases, critical infrastructure, all of it is back within range of a short warning time Russian land-based missile.
Wow.
This is the definition of re-escalation. It brings back a continental-level strategic threat that Europe hadn't faced for over 30 years.
And we're already seeing the response, aren't we? This deployment, it's basically forcing the West's hand. It feels like the start of a new arms race.
It certainly looks that way. The U.S., for instance, is now openly developing and starting to deploy its own medium-range conventional strike capabilities. Things like the Typhoon launcher system, which can fire missiles like the SM-6 or the Tomahawk.
To create a counter-threat.
To establish a credible counter-threat, yes. To restore deterrence. But it's a costly path, and it's dangerous. It's the direct, predictable consequence of Russia breaking the treaty and deploying the 9M729. It forces a reciprocal military buildup.
And we also have to mention the context, the ongoing debate in the U.S. about potentially providing Tomahawk cruise missiles to Ukraine. They have a range of about 1,600 kilometers. How does Russia using the 9M729 play into that specific discussion?
The timing seems highly deliberate again. Many analysts see Russia's open use of the 9M729 now as a kind of preemptive move.
How so?
It's an attempt to normalize the presence and use of ground-launched intermediate-range cruise missiles in the European theater before Ukraine potentially gets a similar capability.
So the message is, look, we're already doing this. Giving Ukraine Tomahawks won't give them some new strategic advantage they don't already face from us. So don't do it. It'll just escalate things further.
That appears to be the underlying signal, yes. Trying to dissuade the West from supplying Tomahawks by demonstrating they've already crossed that threshold themselves.
So the entire story of the 9M729, from the secret violation, the years of denial, the treaty collapse, and now its open use in combat. It's like a playbook for how to dismantle a major international arms control norm and face, well, seemingly manageable consequences.
It fundamentally weakens the credibility of future arms control, absolutely. When a major power can violate a treaty for a decade, build and deploy the forbidden weapon, and then eventually use it as just another tool in its conventional arsenal, well, you have to ask, why would any nation put faith in future treaties? What are the enforcement mechanisms?
It really feels like we've decisively entered a new era, a post-arms control era, maybe. Oh. Where security is defined less by mutual agreements and verification and more by unilateral military strength and managing escalation.
I think that's a fair assessment. That's the key takeaway. The 9M729 went from being this point of intense diplomatic dispute to becoming a fully operational military reality. And that reality is now shaping the new security environment in Europe, whether we like it or not.
Which leaves us, and you listening, with the big kind of unsettling final question. Given that the INF Treaty, this cornerstone, is gone, and weapons that were once considered basically taboo are now being used on the battlefield, what tools are left? What mechanisms, other than just the raw threat of mutual destruction or uncontrolled escalation, can major powers actually use to manage conflict risk?
It's a really profound challenge because the core elements of arms control, trust, and verification, they seem broken right now. And we're already hearing some pretty alarming discussions bubbling up in military and policy circles.
Such as?
Well, things like the U.S. openly discussing maybe restarting nuclear testing, needing to do it on an equal basis with Russia and China, or the further development and potential deployment of other INF range systems, like Russia's newer Oreshnik hypersonic missile.
So without those old guardrails, the future of deterrence looks like it's built purely on demonstrated military capability and the sort of constant calculation of escalation risk.
It seems that way. The big question for leaders everywhere now is figuring out what that next generation of managed risk of strategic stability actually looks like in a world where the old constraints just don't seem to apply anymore. What keeps the peace when the treaties fail?